This video is going to be about why I haven't talked about healing for 3 months, or more specifically, why I haven't talked about the state of healer balance for almost the entirety of Season 3. To set the stage a little bit here, at the beginning of Season 3, one of my goals was to make more content or make more videos like this where I talk about the state of healer balance as the season progresses. The initial plan was to do like one video a week talking about how the meta is shaping up, whatever the effects of the most recent patch are, or the buffs and nerfs that are coming up, that sort of thing. And as a part of that, I thought it would make for a good video or even series of videos where I would play all of the healers and get them up to their portals done. So do a level 20 key on every dungeon for every healing spec. And do that for both Tyrannical and Fortified. Get all healers up to, I believe that's like 2700 IO or something, if I'm not mistaken, which is a little over 100 dungeons. And I got actually quite close to doing that in the first month and a half of Season 3, but I came to one conclusion very quickly, and that is that the healers that were receiving most of the developer attention, I would say, or have been receiving most of the attention for the whole of Dragonflight, with the exception of one healer, are the healers that are doing the best. I would argue that these 3 healers at the moment are the most modern healing specs in the game, as far as like healing profiles go and how their cooldowns work, what they're supposed to do, what they bring to a group, how they play, a lot of those sort of factors. I would argue that Blizzard have done an excellent job at really making 3 healers very good. They did have 4 very good, but the 4th was Holy Paladin, and they ended up being way too strong in Season 2, so they got nerfed something like 30% overall throughput over the course of 6 weeks or something, and it has effectively put them in the bin. But since that's happened, the meta has basically shaped up to having 3 healers at the top, the 3 kings, the S tier healers: Restoration Druid, Mistweaver Monk, and Discipline Priest. And I said effectively as much at the very beginning of January, and we are now at the end of Season 3, or what everyone assumes will be the end of Season 3 very shortly. It's the end of March. We are in the patch for Season 4, but Season 4 hasn't launched yet. We also haven't got the official announcement of the end of Season 3, but we know it's coming, hopefully soon. And what I found interesting throughout all of that time, through effectively most of Season 3, and the purpose for what this video is for, what this discussion is meant to be about, is that the meta really hasn't changed in that whole time. And that isn't a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. I would generalize a little bit here and say that the ST healers, Resto, Druid, Mistweaver, Disc Priest, are good because they really aren't lacking anything. I mean, I think you could argue that Discipline is lacking some mobility, but from a raw like healing throughput standpoint, all 3 specs are fantastic. From how powerful their rotational healing is and how great some of their cooldowns are, also fantastic. They all bring pretty excellent damage, although they all deal it in very different ways, which is interesting and fun and a great state of balance, in my opinion. They also have excellent defensive options. Discipline is probably the one that's lacking a little bit in this category compared to Mistweaver and Resto Druid, but having 2 charges of Pain Sup that they can use on themselves brings them kind of up to par, I would say, with what Mistweaver and Resto Druid can have at their disposal. All 3 also bring great utility, and they don't have any real mana issues at all, or at least not any debilitating ones. So across all dimensions that you could look at or balance healers across, I think all 3 aren't really lacking anything. The A tier healers, I would say, even the B tier healers kind of, even Holy Paladin included, effectively all the rest of the healers, I would say, are similar, which is also why I say they're not far off the S tier healers, but they all lack in some dimension. Resto Shaman healing throughput is fine, the damage is also fine, or when I say fine, I guess I'm meaning competitive, but they lack an external and their defensives kind of suck. Holy Priest is similar. Guardian Spirit just isn't an external like other externals are, and their defensives suck. And that is to say, they suck compared to what other healers have, because usually when I make these kind of statements, there'll be people in the comments saying, oh, well, you know, I just press all these buttons on Holy Priest And I don't have any problems with survivability, which is fair and applicable in many cases, but compared to what like Resto Druid, for example, Mistweaver, for example, even Discipline can have at their disposal for defensives, what Holy Priest has just isn't really competitive. Same thing with Resto Shaman. Preservation, on the other hand, is a little bit like Holy Paladin in that they do have great defensives, but they're lacking in some other dimension. Now, I would say that for Preservation, that is their limited range. And for Holy Paladin, it's their overall throughput. Their numerical power just isn't there. It isn't balanced well enough. They got nerfed too hard after being the kings of Season 2, and now they need a little bit of help. It is a little disheartening or disappointing to see Blizzard specifically state the exact problem that Preservation evokers are having in their recent blue post. They said that it looks like the range limitation for Preservation is proving to be a little bit too much of an issue for them, too hindering for them. But instead of doing anything about that problem after identifying the correct problem, they instead buffed one of the talents, I think a Time of Need, on the right side of the tree, the cheat death talent, which, yeah, it's a little disappointing to see Blizzard properly articulate and identify the problem, but then not solve the problem for Preservation. Holy Paladin is a little bit more difficult. Yes, I think they're just numerically weak, but I also think they have some other more fundamental problems with their gameplay. They are kind of a mixed bag at the moment. Everything that Blizzard have done to make Mistweaver successful as a single specialization that can focus on different styles of play, the kind of caster Mistweaver versus the Fistweaver. Every success that Blizzard have done that has worked so well to make Mistweaver so good, probably, I would say, it's going to be an upcoming video, I would say that Mistweaver is pretty much the single triumph of Dragonflight. Out of all the things we got out of Dragonflight, I'm going to be arguing that Mistweaver is the best. I think it's the best state that any healer has ever been in World of Warcraft. And that's a pretty big claim. But Mistweaver is just so fun and so good for so many different reasons at the moment. So that tells me that Blizzard can definitely figure that out. They can definitely work out how to make a spec have like a caster playstyle, but also a melee playstyle, how to make the talent trees and different abilities and spells that spec has work in those ways and work together. Definitely possible, but in every successful way Blizzard did it with Mistweaver, they exactly did the opposite for Holy Paladin and failed. So there are some problems. Holy Paladin is kind of like a builder, spender spec at the moment, but also kind of not, because it's actually a cooldown based spec, but then also not because it's a hybrid melee and caster spec. It's trying to do too many things at once, and all of those things are antithetical to everything else it's trying to do. So for the past 3 or 4 months at least, the meta hasn't really changed. 3 specs are excellent, 3 specs are okay, but lacking in some somewhat limited regard, and then 1 spec is kind of suffering down the bottom. But this isn't criticism, actually. It might sound like it. I'm complaining about a lot of things or pointing out the problems with a lot of things, but this is actually the most balanced and I would say best season of Mythic Plus as far as healers and healer balance has gone ever. In the past, there have been a couple of seasons where 2 healers can sit in S tier, but usually healing is one of those roles where there's 1 healer that's better than everything else, like Holy Paladins were in Season 2, and then everything kind of falls by the wayside compared to that. The fact that we have 3 healers in S tier at the moment is phenomenal. So credit where credit is due, and well done to Blizzard. I would go even a step further than that and say that it's not just about having 3 separate specs in S tier. I think the craziest and most fantastic part of the current state of healing balance is that we have 3 specs that are all competitive at the highest levels with each other, while also being completely different from one another. Like Resto Druid plays nothing like Mistweaver, it plays nothing like Discipline Priest. They all have very different healing profiles, healing gameplay, things you focus on, things you do. They all handle things in different ways, and yet they are all balanced. So that is just, it's so good to see. I'm so happy that this is the state of affairs. I'm a little bit biased at the moment because I have been a Mistweaver and Disciplined Priest player since about Legion. I pretty much hated the Legion rework of Mistweaver. I think Essence Font is probably the worst spell that's been added, or the worst part of any healing toolkit ever. And I am glad to also see Blizzard mention that that is going away. I believe that's going away in War Within. Essence Font will just get removed. Mistweavers no longer play around it. It's not going to be a part of their toolkit. And the amount of iteration and changes that Discipline has received in Dragonflight is also pretty phenomenal. It's almost had 2 complete talent reworks already so far, but some of the kind of large steps forward for Discipline have been the 50% atonement buff outside of raid situations. I think the spec still has some issues. I preferred the old gameplay with the Mind Blast focus, like 2 Mind Blast charges and things like that, but I can't deny that the spec still is performing really well, and it's managed to still feel very different from all of the other healers. It is difficult for me to say though, like I don't quite know what Resto Shaman, Holy Priest, and Preservation Evoker need, but they need something. It's easy for me to point at Resto Shaman and Holy Priest and say, oh yeah, their external cooldowns really aren't great. Resto Shaman really doesn't have one. Holy Priest one isn't really an external, it's more of like a more healing received buff and a cheat death. But I'm not quite sure if just giving them externals is the answer. I have really enjoyed seeing how good a job Blizzard can do at making very different types of healers all competitive, and I would like to see Resto Shaman, Holy Priest, Preservation, Holy Paladin, I would like to see them get more iteration to get them up to the same kind of feeling of a modernized spec that Resto Druid, Mistweaver, and Disciplined got. And that could be something completely out of the box, kind of like how Grove Guardians modernized and almost revolutionized Resto Druid gameplay and Resto Druid toolkit, but it wasn't on anyone's list of what Resto Druid needed. But it kind of fixed a lot of the problems and shored up some of the weaknesses the spec had. And I think the other 4 non-S tier healers need that sort of inspired change to bring them up to par. I'm interested to see how this meta is going to shape up or maybe carry over into Season 4. I know set bonuses are going to be changing, but what I'm going to be really looking out for is that with the return of dungeons like Not Good Offensive, with the Tempest boss, with pretty much all of Ruby life pools, with a couple of bosses like Veximus in Algathar Academy, with the last 2 bosses in Azure Vaults, I am expecting a lot more emphasis to get placed back on AoE healing throughput again, and the meta to be revolving around how much like raw throughput healers have. And I think the Resto Druid, Mistweaver, Discipline, they certainly have that right now. I'm interested to see how Resto Shaman, Holy Priest, Preservation shape up, and unfortunately, I'm not holding my breath for Holy Paladin. I think Holy Paladin, like raw AoE throughput, is one of its major weaknesses at the moment. Going into another season with a lot more group damage built into the dungeons, I think Holy Paladin's going to suffer quite a lot, actually. But I'm excited to see how all that turns out. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching, and algorithm stuff.